Hello and welcome to the Adeptus Artorum YouTube channel. I'm your host, Caros Retinue, and today I'll be bringing you some vital stories, facts and information from the furthest corners of the Warhammer 40,000 universe. Today, I want to discuss a specific human conglomeration that exists independently of the Imperium of Man in the current millennium. This seceded conglomeration of ex-Imperial separatists is one of the most dominant presences in the Periphery subsector within the sector of Calyx of the Segmentum Obscurus. I'm talking, of course, about the Crimson Armies of the Severan Dominate. In the current millennium, under the leadership of its Duke, Severus, the 13th of Kulth, the Severan Dominate stands in the middle of a three-sided conflict in which they face not only the terrifying Warg gathered by feared Orcan warlord Genghis Grimtooth, but of course, considering their open renunciation of its creed, the Imperium of Man. To better understand the Severan Dominate and the reason for its existence, we need to explore the origins of a certain rogue trader prince who played a vital role in its eventual founding, though himself never to witness it. He was called Severus, and he was the first of his name, and in his possession, a much coveted warrant of trade, granted to his bloodline by the High Lords of Terra themselves. This man was without doubt a man of the highest esteem. He was a war hero, responsible for bringing the Calyx sector into the Imperial fold in the 39th millennium. Without his influence and tactical prowess, the war to control the Calyx sector would have taken centuries to achieve. It has also been said, in which I think there is great note, that without Severus I, the famous Saint Drusus may have actually been unable to complete his conquests of legend. It is unfortunate as to the circumstances of those two men, for soon Drusus would surpass Severus in imperial esteem. This was a scenario which was easily ignored by Severus, as his only real concern was to keep his holdings consolidated to the Calyx sector, even at the expense of expanding the sector. And unfortunately, as generations passed, both his name and his achievements had been forgotten, and even though they were heroic beyond the call of duty, it was Severus who unlocked the Marcaean marshes by boiling the hideous Xenos with plasma and turning and spawning the seas of Cantus Extremis, breaking a deadlock that had stalled the advance of 3 million Imperial troopers. It was he who educated the ignorant leaders of the Imperial Navy and charted the warp route between Drea and Icanathos. He was even said to have been solely responsible for the slaying of a mighty warp beast that had attached itself to his vessel, in which, before it was dragged into the abyss, the prince hacked out a single crystalline eye several meters in diameter from the beast. He truly was an exceptional man. Though his victories were great, it was his forging of the Periphery subsector that brought him true glory, at least for a short time. Why would the deeds of such a man go unknown to the people of the Calyx sector in the current millennium? The answer is simple. One of the more common human flaws: hubris. For as we know, the prince was promised much by the terms of his warrant of trade, yet the High Lords of Terra had no intentions of honouring its terms, for they had never expected him to survive the horrors that lurked within the Calyx expanse. Initially, before being in recipients of any title, the prince was a senior courtier in the Senatorum Imperialis on Terra, and his political expertise was carrying towards the seat of the highest council. But during this rise to power, the prince had acquired many rivals, and these men thought him a murderer of his own peers. Thusly, they instigated the circumstances in which Severus received his warrant of trade in the first place, thusly forcing Severus to embark on his crusade, hoping that this would put an end to his ambitions for good in the form of his death. Severus was fully aware of the deceit woven by the High Lords of Terra, and so interpreted the terms of his warrant to justify him claiming the sector as his own personal realm, exempt from the laws and demands placed upon the rest of the Imperium. Basically, Severus made himself the sole ruler of his own empire within the boundaries of the Imperium, and he felt proud in the fact that he felt he had earned this title. Here, we shall return to St. Drusus. While Severus set about consolidating his power after the Second Battle of Culf, Drusus fought on, claiming untold worlds for the good emperor. Now, it is true that some say he was killed in that time period, and he was, though he was resurrected. His newly risen status elevated his renown among those of the ecclesiarchy, whom now branded him as a living saint. He is celebrated still to this day throughout the Imperium as the patron saint of the Calix sector, while Severus now only held the fairly lowly title in comparison of Duke. Drusus's legend now eclipsed that of Severus, and any hope for the establishment of his own realm was lost, and each person of merit or prestige in the Calix sector openly declared their worship for Drusus as a paragon of the Emperor's justice, and in return, no one would support Severus, not in his ambitions. By the time Drusus was elevated to the First Lord of the Calix sector, Severus had become a feeble shadow of his former self, broken in every way. He passed away, but before he did, he would impart his swollen, bitter tale of jealousy to his only son, and him to his, until the hatred, jealousy and entitlement was built into his very bloodline. Ironically, Drusus would pass away around a solar month after Severus's death. Generation after generation of House Severus heard, and then repeated the tales of woe, until in 779 Millennium 41, Duke Severus XIII assumed power over what little remained of his once prestigious house. Unlike his predecessors, Severus XIII had managed to travel with relative ease up the roads of power in the Calix sector. His method as to how he achieved this, though, is not actively known. In 799 Millennium 41, Duke Severus XIII assumed a position in which he believed he could finally achieve the dreams of his family line, claiming the title of the Lord of the Perfiary subsector. Though about to take action, the Duke knew he could not openly renounce the Imperium right away, for fear of the subsector's loyalist planetary governors rebelling against him. So instead, he took a far darker approach. Severus would send spies out into the Perfiary to seek out anyone who would lend him aid, no matter the price of it, and waiting there for the right moment, in the darkness, were the Children of Thorns, a Drakari cabal exiled from Camorra, bolstered by the dregs of Drakari society. Members of the Children of Thorns look for any opportunity to raid real space, to gather fuel in their bid to return to power in Camorra. In aiding Severus, these debauched creatures gain exactly that opportunity, and the Perfiary is a subsector in which Imperial forces couldn't even dream to oppose their real space raids. And so, thousands of men and women and children are dragged away screaming into the darkest corners of the webway to face horrors beyond their wildest dreams because of a deal that Severus had made. Through this vile pact, for over a decade, Severus and the Drakari cunningly worked to cut ties between the Perfiary and the Calix sector, bit by bit, unnoticed, until they virtually achieved Severus I's goal of their own personal realm in all but name. Soon after Severus's rulership had commenced, his fiefdom was besieged by the Orc warlord mentioned previously, Genghis Grimtooth. Many of Severus's advisors attempted to convince him to go to the Greater Imperium for aid against the incursions, to which they would have been promptly executed by Severus. As the siege went on, with most of his council dead, some by his own hand, Severus had a moment of grim acknowledgement in the fact that they had been right all along, and so he dispatched messengers to the court of Calix sector lord Marius Hax to beg for aid against the Orc invasion. The first messenger was killed, then the next, until, out of desperation, Severus sent his own granddaughter to beg for the aid that they required, to which Lord Hax found greatly amusing, his laughs filling the room, for he knew well of the treachery of Severus the 13th, though he did not reveal it. After his dealings with the Lord, Severus desired to leave the Imperium even more passionately, but realised that the people of the soon-to-be Severan Dominate were still devout followers of the Imperial Creed, and so he manufactured a tale so that they would side with him in his desire to leave the monolithic Imperium. He knew that his people would not be so easily swayed, and so when the Orcs attacked again, and this time the Astra Militarum responded, the Duke realised that he had a limited time frame to achieve his goals. The Duke went to even further drastic action, realising that their faith in the Imperium had to be broken. He began to make it seem as though peaceful negotiation between them and the Imperium was impossible, and he cut off the supply of food and water and told his people that the Imperium was having food shortages. He removed military personnel and all those who could maintain order, and eventually the worlds began to become forcibly self-destructive, and they barely survived. At the same time, he increased imperial tithes for each of those things and blamed the rises on the Imperium, all while increasing his own personal army and supply. He enrolled the horrifying forces of the Children of Thords to raid his worlds in an attempt to separate families and lower morale, and in the end, most of the worlds were at their tipping points. Severus would intervene when a world had come close to revolution, providing a military presence to restore order and supplies to quench the starvation, all the while making sure that all credit fell upon his own shoulders. Of course, this was just the beginning for him, and time again planets would fall prey to this when, eventually, the concept of secession came into play once more. A majority of the worlds openly considered the concept positively, and on each world, the Duke agreed to only consider it as a last resort. But as the supplies began to run thin, Severus contacted each of the world's planetary governors to rally with him in the formation of a new government. A skilled actor with a silver tongue, Severus told each world that they would be the first to join this new federation against the Imperial Creed, and in each instance, they felt as though they had joined a worthy cause in which they themselves had helped to create. This created a sense of ownership, and so the people began to believe that in this idea they would have a greater freedom than that imposed by the Imperium and its cruelty. Severus, now besieged on all sides by Orcs, Dracari, the same Dracari in which he had made a deal with previously, and soon a Chaos Warband of Space Marines under the influence of Zinch, he decided to announce his personal annexation of the chaotic zone between the Perfieri into what he called the Severan Dominate, only until the crisis had passed. But Lord Hax, he took an instantaneous offence to this and declared Severus a traitor and a secessionist. And so there was no further debate. The Severan Dominate was born, and as a political entity, the Severan Dominate only exists in the souls of those who follow the Duke and those who fight to maintain its borders. But in the eyes of the Imperium, it is nothing more than a small collection of worlds run by an arrogant secessionist, its people having betrayed their very humanity. Okay guys, so we've unfortunately reached that time in the video where I must leave you guys, but as is tradition on the channel, you won't leave empty-handed, as I'll leave you with a quote. This quote is a quote from Duke Severus the 13th addressing the people of Lucas. The High Lords of Terra would bleed us dry for their purposes, at the same time that they refuse to help defend us against the Xenos. The time has come to withhold our tithe so that we may use it for our own defense. Alright guys, this has been a video that has delved into the key factors in the founding of the Severan Dominate. If you guys feel like there's anything I've missed, please feel free to mention it in the comments below. If you've enjoyed this video, then don't hesitate to hit that like button, and if you wish to stay up to date with future content, then subscribe to the channel below. With that, I've been your humble host, Caros Retinue, and thank you for watching.